Ed Sullivan stood at his desk, gripping the telephone receiver so hard his knuckles had gone white. It was September 17th, 1967, exactly 12 hours after the Doors had walked off his stage, and Ed was making a call he'd made only 3 times in his entire career. A call to every major television network in America, every major venue promoter, every booking agent who mattered. The message was simple and devastating. The Doors are finished. Anyone who books them after what they did on my show will never work with CBS again. On the other end of the line, William Morris Agency's head of talent listened in silence. He understood what this meant. Ed Sullivan wasn't just banning the Doors from his show. He was using every connection, every relationship, every ounce of power he'd accumulated over 20 years to erase them from American entertainment entirely. And it was working. But what Ed Sullivan didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he made those calls, was that Jim Morrison had been waiting his entire life for someone powerful enough to destroy. Because Jim Morrison didn't want to be successful, he wanted to burn the whole thing down. And Ed Sullivan had just given him the match. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is the moment when the most dangerous man in rock and roll decided that being banned from television was exactly what he'd been hoping for all along. To understand what happened between Ed Sullivan and the Doors, you need to understand that Jim Morrison was not like other rock stars. Elvis wanted to be famous. The Beatles wanted to be loved. But Jim Morrison wanted something darker and more complicated. He wanted to expose the lies that American culture was built on. He wanted to make people so uncomfortable that they couldn't look away. And he saw commercial success, television appearances, mainstream acceptance, all of it as a trap that would neuter everything dangerous about what the Doors were doing. The Doors had exploded onto the scene in 1967 with Light My Fire, a song that had somehow made it onto top 40 radio, despite being over 7 minutes long and including lyrics about funeral pyres. The song went to #1. The album went gold, and suddenly the Doors were the biggest new band in America, which meant they were exactly the kind of act that Ed Sullivan needed on his show. Ed's talent coordinator had caught the Doors at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles, and had been impressed by their musicianship and the audience response. But he'd also been deeply uncomfortable with Jim Morrison's stage presence. Morrison didn't perform like other singers. He swayed. He seemed drunk or drugged even when he wasn't. He made eye contact with individual audience members in ways that felt predatory. And his lyrics, when you actually listened to them, were about sex and death, and breaking through to something on the other side of sanity. But Light My Fire was #1. And Ed Sullivan needed young viewers, so the booking was made with very specific conditions. The Doors would perform 2 songs, and they would change one lyric in Light My Fire. The line "Girl, we couldn't get much higher" had to become "Girl, we couldn't get much better." The word higher was an obvious drug reference, and CBS standards and practices had been crystal clear: no drug references on the Ed Sullivan Show. Period. The Doors manager had met with the band to relay CBS's requirement. Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player, had been pragmatic. It's one word. We change it. We get on Sullivan. We reach 50 million people. That's worth changing one word. Robbie Krieger and John Densmore, the guitarist and drummer, had agreed. This was the biggest opportunity of their career. You didn't throw that away over one syllable. Jim Morrison had listened to all of this and then asked a question that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Why? 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 The manager had asked, why do we have to change the lyric? Why does one word matter so much to them? What are they really afraid of? The manager had tried to explain that it wasn't about fear. It was about standards, about what was acceptable for family television, about not offending sponsors. Jim had listened with that strange smile that people who knew him had learned to dread. So they want us to lie, Jim had said. They want us to pretend the song is about something different than what it's about. They want us to help them maintain the illusion that everything is safe and controlled and acceptable. Jim, the manager had said carefully, this is the Ed Sullivan Show. This is how you become a real star. You play by their rules for one night, and then you can do whatever you want. Jim's response had been quiet, but absolute. I don't want to be the kind of star that playing by their rules makes you. But the pressure from the rest of the band and the label had been intense. This was their chance. This was how you went from being a band to being a phenomenon. And finally, reluctantly, Jim had agreed. He would change the lyric. He gave his word. Ed Sullivan had been nervous about the Doors from the moment they'd arrived at the studio for rehearsal. Jim Morrison had shown up late, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses, his movements slow and deliberate in ways that suggested he was on something even though no one could prove it. During the rehearsal, Jim had changed the lyric as promised. Girl, we couldn't get much better. Ed had relaxed slightly. The kid understood what was at stake. But Bob Precht, Ed's son-in-law and producer, had pulled Ed aside after the rehearsal. Ed, I don't trust him. Morrison's eyes when he sang that changed lyric, he was smirking, like he was playing a joke on us. Ed had waved off the concern. He changed the lyric. That's what matters. We're live in 6 hours. It's too late to find a replacement. September 17, 1967, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Studio 50 was packed with the usual Sunday night crowd. Families, couples, people who watched every week and trusted Ed Sullivan to bring them entertainment that was exciting but safe. The Doors were scheduled for 9:15, prime time, right in the middle of the show when the most people would be watching. Ed introduced them with his standard formal delivery, giving nothing away about his concerns. Ladies and gentlemen, the Doors. The band walked onto the stage. Ray Manzarek sat at his keyboards. Robbie Krieger positioned himself with his guitar. John Densmore took his place at the drums. And Jim Morrison grabbed the microphone like he was grabbing someone by the throat. They started playing Light My Fire. The organ intro was hypnotic. The guitar work was precise. Everything was going exactly as rehearsed. And then they reached the verse with the contested lyric. Jim Morrison looked directly into the camera, and he sang clearly and deliberately, Girl, we couldn't get much higher. The control room exploded. The director looked at Ed for instruction. Cut away. Stay on them. Ed's face had gone from its usual stone-like calm to something approaching fury in the space of a single word. But the cameras kept rolling because this was live television, and there was nothing Ed could do except watch Jim Morrison break his promise to 50 million Americans. But Jim wasn't done. He'd kept the word higher in the lyric, but now he started moving in ways he hadn't during rehearsal. His hips rolled, his body swayed with a sexuality that was unmistakable. His eyes half closed. He looked like he was having sex with the microphone, with the camera, with America itself. This wasn't rock and roll as entertainment. This was rock and roll as a violation of every agreement that had been made. When the song ended, the studio audience applauded, though many of them looked confused or uncomfortable. Jim Morrison stood at the microphone, staring into the camera with an expression that people who were watching that night described as contempt. Pure, undiluted contempt for Ed Sullivan, for CBS, for the whole machinery of American television that had tried to control him. Ed Sullivan was waiting in the wings when the Doors walked off stage. His face was a color that his staff had never seen before. Not red, almost purple. My office. Now, in Ed's office with the door closed, Ed unleashed 20 years of accumulated authority on Jim Morrison. You gave me your word. You looked me in the eye and promised you would change that lyric. And you went on my stage in front of 50 million people and you lied to me. Jim Morrison smiled. That same smile that had made his manager nervous earlier. I didn't lie to you, Ed. I just decided in the moment that keeping my integrity mattered more than keeping my word to you. Your integrity. Ed's voice was shaking now. You think there's integrity in breaking your promise, in violating the standards of my show, in disrespecting me and everyone who works here. Yes, Jim said simply, because your standards are lies. Your show is a lie. You present this sanitized version of entertainment where nothing dangerous is allowed, nothing real is allowed, and you call that family values. But it's just control, and I won't be controlled. Ed pointed at Jim Morrison with a finger that trembled slightly. "You will never appear on my show again. You will never appear on any CBS program. And I promise you by tomorrow morning, every television network in America will know what you did tonight." Jim stood up. "Good. Tell them all. Because you're doing me a favor, Ed. You're proving my point. The establishment can't handle anything real, so they have to destroy it. And now everyone will know that's exactly what you did to us." Ed made the calls that night. Every call he'd threatened to make. William Morris Agency, NBC, ABC, every major venue in New York, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. The message was consistent. The Doors had violated their agreement with CBS, had shown themselves to be unreliable and unprofessional, and anyone who booked them was making an enemy of Ed Sullivan, and by extension the entire power structure of American entertainment. The effect was immediate and devastating. Television appearances that had been in negotiation were canceled. Radio play for Light My Fire dropped precipitously as stations received suggestions from their corporate owners. The Doors found themselves shut out of every mainstream platform that mattered. But something else happened that Ed Sullivan had not anticipated. The story of what had happened spread through the counterculture like wildfire. Jim Morrison had defied Ed Sullivan, had broken his promise to the most powerful men in television, had sung the word higher on live television, knowing it would end his band's relationship with the mainstream forever. And to the kids who were already questioning everything their parents believed, to the young people who were marching against the war and fighting for civil rights, Jim Morrison became a hero overnight. The Doors' album sales exploded after the Sullivan ban, not in spite of it, because of it. Being banned by Ed Sullivan was better publicity than any television appearance could have been. It marked the Doors as dangerous, as real, as unwilling to compromise. They became the band that the establishment was afraid of, and in 1967, being feared by the establishment was the most valuable currency in rock and roll. The Doors never appeared on mainstream television again. They never needed to. They sold out concerts across the country, released albums that went gold and platinum, became one of the most successful bands of the late 1960s. And every time someone asked Jim Morrison about being banned from Ed Sullivan, he gave the same answer: best thing that ever happened to us. Ed Sullivan died in 1974, and one of the last interviews he gave included a question about the Doors incident. "Do you regret banning them?" the interviewer asked. Ed was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that I didn't see what Morrison understood immediately. That being banned from my show was exactly what he wanted. He played me. He used my power against me. He made me into the enemy, and that made him into the hero. I'd been in entertainment for 30 years and a 23-year-old kid from film school outsmarted me." Jim Morrison died in Paris in 1971 at age 27, but his reputation as the rock star who couldn't be controlled, who refused to compromise, who chose artistic integrity over commercial success, that reputation was largely built on the night he broke his promise to Ed Sullivan. He'd understood something that most performers never understood. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is get yourself banned. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Jim Morrison knew that Ed Sullivan's attempt to destroy the Doors would actually make them immortal. Have you ever had someone try to silence you and found that their attempt to silence you only made you louder? Share your story in the comments below.